My name is Amanda Gress, and I'm a member of the Dole Institute's Student Advisory Board. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending tonight's presentation. The Dole Student Advisory Board is composed of KU students committed to the work of the Dole Institute. We attend regular meetings, assist in events like this one, and plan an SAB-sponsored program every semester. Members of the SAB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you. If you enjoyed tonight's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. Your attendance and feedback help shape future programming. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the interview, we will have some time for audience questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hands, and a student helper with a microphone will come to you. Please ask just one brief question. And now, please welcome Associate Director of the Dole Institute, Barbara Ballard.
Thank you, Amanda. We value the input from our Student Advisory Board. I think it's wonderful for our students to get that experience, but you will also know that they're very actively involved in a lot that we do on our campus. I hope you will enjoy this evening the environment and energy, the role of free enterprise, and the government. But before I go into the introduction of Bob Inglis, I would like to just remind you in the back of your program that we have the Fort Leavenworth series of many of you know who have attended those programs at home and abroad, selected topics in World War II, how the Red Army defeated Germany, and the Three Alibis with Dr. Jonathan House will be Thursday, May 2nd at 3 p.m. It's also a very busy day for us because that evening, on May 2nd, we will have our Spring 2030 Dole Lecture, and it's Ike's Legacy. And we all know this down the road in Abilene is where our former President Eisenhower lived. We will also have a program with Brigadier General Carl Riddell, Executive Director of the Eisenhower Memorial Mission. And many of you probably know that Ike is a personal hero of Bob Dole. So when we look at that and what Ike did to contribute not only to the state of Kansas, but to the entire United States, you will realize that he was very instrumental in the building of our nation. Also, there's a film screening on May 8th with Ngwan Gambu, Heart of a Tiger, and I hope if you're available at 3 p.m., you'll learn a lot about 50 years after the first U.S. ascent of Mount Everest and find out more about that as well. But with our program this evening, the environment and energy. Bob Inglis is Executive Director of the Energy and Enterprise Initiative, and he's based at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Under Inglis' leadership, the Energy and Enterprise Initiative advocates conservative alternatives to big government, mandates, the tax incentives, and also we talk a lot about an optimistic conservative. Inglis launched his company to apply a can-do American spirit in the challenges at hand. Before starting his business, he represented South Carolina's 4th Congressional District. And I find this very interesting because the area is Greenville, Spartanburg, Union counties for 12 years in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was first elected in Congress in 1992, having never run for public office. He spent 6 years in the U.S. House, 1993 to 98, and kept a campaign commitment to serve just 3 terms. And in 1998, he unsuccessfully challenged Democratic Senator Fritz Hollings. And in the fall of 2004, Inglis was reelected to the House in an open seat he had previously held and went on to serve another 6 years in Congress. He was a member of the House Science Committee, where he served as the chairman of the Research Subcommittee and then as the ranking member of the Energy and Environment Subcommittee. During his 6 years on the Science Committee, interactions with scientists in Antarctica, Australia, and elsewhere shaped his views on climate change. We hear a lot about climate change. We hear a lot about small business. We hear a lot about big government business. But I think this evening we're going to talk about what is the proper role of the federal government in protecting the environment. I hope when you leave this evening you will have the answer to that question and others. But I'm going to turn it over to Bill Lacey, Director of the Dole Institute of Politics. And with the help of your questions and the interviewing of Bob Inglis this evening, I'm sure you will leave here a little more enlightened than when you took your seat this evening. So thank you so very much for being with us, and I turn it over to Bill Lacey.
Please welcome Bob Inglis to the Dole Institute, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay back there? You guys are hearing me? There you go. That's what I get for asking, right? Thank you all for coming out. Bob, let's start. Talk to us a little bit about your background, how you got interested in public service, how you got interested in science, and take a little time to develop that.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's really, really neat. Bob Dole is somebody that I very much enjoyed working with when I was in the House, and he actually came to campaign for me in the 1998 Senate race, and was a real hit in South Carolina. He told me that one reason to be for him was that he would have been the only Bob that had ever been elected president. And so Bob is a name that's gone out of circulation. You know, do you know any Bob under 40? Now that I've said that, there's going to be somebody that's 22 and his name Bob, and I've just lost them. But anyway, it's a name that sort of went out of existence. So anyhow, I grew up in Bluffton, South Carolina, which is at the coast near Hilton Head, Bill, and fourth of 5 children. My parents are, my dad is turning 90, just like Bob Dole is soon to turn 90. You know, sort of standard family there with industrial engineer dad and homemaker mom and 5 kids. I was the fourth of 5. I went to Duke for college. Best thing about that was meeting my wife. Then I went to UVA for law school, University of Virginia for law school. Practiced for 2 years in Savannah, Georgia, and then moved back to South Carolina, to Greenville, South Carolina, which is, you know, South Carolina is a triangle. We're the inland point on that triangle, Greenville is. We have a little teeny bit of mountains in South Carolina, and that's northern Greenville County where my family and I live. So my wife is also a family of 5, and so we had to match that. So we have 5 kids that are 27 to 16, a boy and 4 girls. And so I was practicing law in Greenville, commercial real estate, and in '92 ran for office, having never run for office before, and in a miracle got elected to the House. And then served 6 years, you just heard, was out 6 years. And then ran again in 2004. Thought I would serve a good long time, maybe, you know, try to match Bob Dole's longevity or something. But there's a tea party going on, and I was specifically uninvited to the tea party. I thought I was a nice enough fellow, they should invite me, but I was specifically uninvited in the primary in South Carolina in June of 2010. And so that's when I started doing this Energy and Enterprise Initiative. I might add something relevant to the conversation about climate change. In my first 6 years in Congress, I was a total poo-pooer of this whole stuff. I said it's nonsense, Al Gore's imagination. In fact, we had a great press conference one time, absolutely bashing Al Gore. Worked out quite nicely in 1993. Freshman congressman, and we were doing sort of a Jack Kemp kind of appeal to minority voters in the teeny bit of inner cities, Greenville, South Carolina we have. So I was there and in front of a stack of coal, or sacks of coal and wood, and I said, Al Gore wants to raise the prices on your heating bill. Not that we heat a whole lot with coal and wood, and it's not that terribly cold in Greenville, South Carolina in the winter, but anyway, got great headlines out of it. And then I was out 6 years, out of Congress 6 years. My kids were growing up. My son, our oldest, was voting for the first time in 2004. And he came to me and said, Dad, I'll vote for you, because I've just turned 18. But you're going to clean up your act on the environment. And problem for me was his 4 sisters agreed, his mother agreed, and they could all change the locks on the doors. And so I had this new vital constituency that I had to respond to. And then I got on science committee, and as you heard, went to Antarctica. We can go into that if you want to, saw some evidence there. Second trip with the science committee to Antarctica, got inspired by an Aussie climate scientist actually to act, and voted against cap and trade, but proposed an alternative, which was a revenue neutral carbon tax, which we might get into. And so I've been on both sides of this. I've been the guy that said it was nonsense and the guy that says it's real and there's a free enterprise solution.
Okay, let's talk about today. It's April 23rd. The average high for this part of the country on April 23rd is 68 degrees. The daytime high here was 38. I saw 8 cars off the road because of ice on my way to the office this morning. And you and Alex showed up wearing suits without top coats when it was this cold. What does that say?
Well, I left my coat in the car because I didn't want to become bundled up to a conference or to discussion on climate change. I mean, no. What it says is that, wow, some strange weather, isn't it? We've had a cool spring in South Carolina as well. It was a warm winter and then a cool spring. I'm not a scientist. I used to play one on the science committee, right? So I won't act like one here tonight. But I would tell you what scientists would say is that what we're observing is weather. Climate is over a longer period of time. As Secretary Chu once said at the science committee, he said, used an analogy that worked for me because I grew up at the coast. He said, there's a difference between tides and waves. Waves are the weather. They come up on the beach and they might knock down your sandcastle. The tide is the thing that is longer term. You know, in the case of coastal South Carolina, it's a 6-hour cycle. And so 6 hours and it's low tide, 6 hours later it's high tide. That's climate change. The waves are the weather, what weather's doing today or this summer or this winter. So, and it is very interesting though that there's some real interesting research on our perception of this. Apparently, temperature has been identified as a tribal marker, a cultural marker. So people who are conservative underrate hot temperatures. And people who are liberal or be inclined to typically to be in favor of climate action do the opposite. They don't underrate heat. In other words, it's an example of what social scientists call motivated cognition, right? The idea that I'm going to go find something out that reinforces my view. And so when Senator Inhofe sees Snowmageddon in Washington, it affirms his view and he says, see, there's no climate change. If this summer we have record-breaking heat in Washington, Senator Inhofe will not notice it. And that would be typical of the research that's being done right now, as we're finding that's the way people are. We seek out information that affirms who we are and what we believe. Interesting, though, that in storm intensity, we're not doing that yet because it hasn't become a cultural marker. And so you can, across the spectrum, political spectrum, you get more accurate reporting of storm intensity. That, gee, something's up with storm intensity. But if that, I would expect, would become eventually marked with cultural meaning, and we'd start seeing people either elevating or minimizing the importance of those storms.
Okay, this is an easy question, but it's a complicated answer, so please take your time and explain. Talk about your policy initiatives. Talk about what you're here to talk about tonight in terms of the concept of a revenue-neutral carbon tax using the markets to solve the issue of the climate change.
Right. So I think one of the reasons, this ties in with that motivated cognition, one of the reasons that people on my side of the aisle, conservatives, don't typically engage in this talk about energy and climate is that it's sort of assumed that if there's a problem, there's going to be a big government answer to the problem. That if it's for real, if climate change is for real, then it necessarily indicates that we've got to have a bigger nanny state that is more invasive, more regulatory, more tax take. And so therefore, naturally, we think, well, let's go back to whether there's a problem, because it appears that the solution is something we don't want, so let's go back and let's talk about whether the problem exists. It's sort of like, you know, if you're my doctor and you tell me, listen, this is what we're going to do in this surgery, listen, we're going to remove your head, and then we're going to operate on your neck, and then we're going to put your head back on. I think I'd go back to saying, let's talk about whether this neck problem is really that bad. Because, you know, let's not go through that surgery if that's what's entailed in it, right? And so we're stuck in a conversation in America that was started by the left on energy and climate. And what we exist to do is to change that conversation, to break the link between the observation of the problem and the assumed solution of big government. We're here to say that there is a way to do this with an elegant price signal that actually reduces regulation. You can repeal some of the Clean Air Act, and you can get rid of those tax incentives, and you can get rid of some of those mandates if you just send a price signal. And then watch what happens as consumers, in the liberty of enlightened self-interest, pursue their best ends. They will become demand drivers of innovation, so that then entrepreneurs, inventors, investors will be able to sell products to willing customers, because customers will have a felt need. What we're talking about then is a true cost comparison between competing fuels. We want to have all the cost in on all the fuels, and then watch the free enterprise system sort it out. Now, this, I should state right there, there's a role for the government, and just before this I was asked by somebody about the role of government. I think it's important to point out that you know, you'll find out here quickly, I guess, that I'm a Republican, not a Libertarian. There used to be a difference, but it's good to say that here at Bob Dole's place. You know, I value libertarian thought, but I'm not a libertarian, I'm a Republican. But there's a lot of commonality between libertarians and Republicans. But the role for government, which I'm comfortable with as a Republican, is saying that there should be a cop on the beat to see that all the costs are in on all the fuels, that we don't have some fuels socializing their cost and privatizing their profits. If you do that, you have an unfair competition, right? And so this true cost comparison we break down into 4 parts, and then we'll see what you think about these 4. It's first, let's eliminate all subsidies for all fuels. At this point, if you're in the wind business, you're gasping for air because you're thinking we can't survive without the production tax credit. But hold on, and by the way, that affirms everybody in the Tea Party, because they're right that we shouldn't have any more Solyndras. We shouldn't have the government picking winners and losers in any industry, including the energy sector. So let's get the government out of that business, eliminate all the subsidies for all the fuels. And by the way, that also means in oil and gas, no special tax provisions for accelerated depreciation for this and that, no low-cost leases on public lands, no, we're talking fair value for goods received and true cost comparisons. Okay, so eliminate all the subsidies. Second, attach all cost to all fuels. We do that through the approximation of those costs in a carbon tax. That's real dangerous to say, because on my side of the aisle, if you say carbon, conservatives break out in hives. If you say tax, they go into anaphylactic shock. And so, you know, so bear with me. We got some EpiPens available. You got any EpiPens? They're available in the aisles. If you need help, call on us. We'll get to you quickly, and will stop the anaphylactic reaction, okay? Because while we propose a second thing, an attachment of all the cost, upstream application of the tax, so that'd be at the mine, at the wellhead, tax the carbon content. Put a price on the carbon there. That means all downstream price increases coming, right? And we don't run away from that. Some people like Waxman and Markey went to the floor to defend cap and trade. They said it won't raise electricity prices. That was utter nonsense. It would clearly raise the prices of electricity. And in fact, if it wouldn't, what was the purpose of doing it? And so, because you're trying to get to the true cost rather than the hidden costs that aren't attached at the meter. So we say it's going to increase the price of electricity. By the way, a $25 per ton price on carbon would probably result in a 25-cent per gallon increase in the price of gasoline and a 1 to 2 cent per kilowatt hour increase in the price of electricity. In other words, not catastrophic. It's there, you feel it, but it's not catastrophic. But then the third thing, that's all the bad news now. The bad news is all over. Then the third thing is we match that carbon tax, which is item number 2, with a dollar for dollar reduction in other taxes. So that could be a reduction in personal income taxes, a reduction in corporate income taxes, a reduction in payroll taxes, FICA taxes, or it could be a dividend. All the money collected from the carbon tax, you would refund to people through a dividend. All those are acceptable to us. So that there's no increase in the size of government here. Unlike my friend Henry Waxman, who wouldn't mind me calling him a liberal from California, he wants to shield Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid from changes. If I were still in Congress, I would want to change those programs to make them sustainable. So I'm not after getting more revenue so that we can avoid those changes. We're for keeping government at least constant, and if I had my druthers, we'd reduce the size of it. But in this, we're revenue neutral, so that if we're going to do the carbon tax, we pair it with a dollar for dollar reduction of the taxes. Then the fourth final point is that we make it a border adjustable tax. And this is very important because otherwise you decimate American manufacturing, you actually increase global emissions. So what you want to avoid is the shutting down of production in America and the shipping of that production, say, to China or India. Because China and India have a higher energy intensity than we do. So if that's the result of a carbon tax, you're a double loser. You've lost employment and you've increased global emissions. So let's not do that. The way not to do that is to make it a border adjustable tax so that it's removed on exports and imposed on imports. We maintain in a WTO compliant way. Now, I will acknowledge right off the bat there's debate about that, whether it's WTO compliant. But I would note that the VAT in Europe is WTO compliant. And it's also, the bill that I had in Congress, was an alternative to cap and trade, would have made it so the import duty on, say, Chinese flat steel would be based on American carbon footprint, or carbon footprint of American flat steel, which would in effect cut China a break on their, as our trading partner, because we wouldn't be charging at their level, we'd be charging at our more efficient level. The reason for that is mostly administrative efficiency, that we know our carbon footprint, we can't really audit theirs. But it also helps us in the WTO because we're able to argue we were obviously not trying to be trade punitive because we're actually cutting them a break. So those are the four elements about how we get to this true cost comparison. It's all about setting the economics right.
Okay. Why is there a tendency when facing environmental or energy problems to default to a federal, bigger government solution?
Well, I think it's sort of that we've been conditioned to that. We've come to think that, you know, regulation sort of is the way to go. You you know, historically, there's a, if at Inglis Industries dump on Bill's property, Bill has a cause of action against me under biblical law, under English common law, under American common law. It's a law of trespass. That's one way to handle it. I saw something about the Nixon Republican somewhere along in here with Bob Dole.
Over that way.
You know, Richard Nixon came along with some things like Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, EPA kind of regulatory function, and so it sort of supplanted that law of trespass in a way. We sort of started handling this by regulation. I believe that there's an opportunity to go to another approach, which is a price signal, which would be very exciting, because then you set the free enterprise system on fire to deliver this innovation. And you know, we think that innovation, you know, seems far away and all of that, but just to give you a measuring life, you know, I remember being in Congress in 1996, I guess it was, in the Charlotte airport. A guy asked me what my email address was. And I was so proud because it had just been put on my card. And so I handed him my card, and he said, "That's a website." And I said, "What's the difference?" I mean, it's not that I'm so ignorant, but that was 1996 or so, right? I mean, in 1996, did anybody know the difference between a website and an email address? Answer, no, not many people knew, because they really didn't exist. That's such a short period of time, and look how it's changed so dramatically. So while we think we're stuck in this coal-fired electricity economy, or this right where we are with whatever petroleum, maybe we are, but maybe that's because we have yet begun to fight with free enterprise. Maybe we've yet begun to put free enterprise at work on this problem. Maybe we're still stuck in sort of regulatory approach. We do CAFE standards. This is a classic example. CAFE standards. Well, they're easily evaded. Those are the car standards, you know, mileage efficiency standards. Well, you can evade those by declaring it to be a truck. And then you're not subject. Well, what kind of deal is that? Wouldn't it be better just to put the price, the actual price on the gasoline, and then say, if you want to drive a Suburban, go right ahead. Just pay the full freight. You might choose therefore, if you don't haul around cattle or something, to pick a smaller car without anybody telling you to, without anybody being regulated. Just give them a price, and then I'll decide how big of a car I want, how much I want to pay.
Are Republicans and conservatives coming around on environmental and energy issues, specifically climate change at all? Do you see any positive signs there?
What's a building year, Coach? You know, that's that's what football coaches say when they're not winning yet, right? So I think we can't say we're winning yet. We're a long way from winning. We've got a long way to go here. But it is a building year. I mean, we're in the process of breaking through this sort of cultural marker. It really is. Russell Moore, who's the dean of the Southern Baptist Seminary, told me, he said, this is not a head issue, this is a heart issue. Something causes this to bounce off the heart. It never gets to the head. So this energy and climate thing appears to stop here. It doesn't get to the head. The head is really pretty clear. If you set the economics right, particularly if you believe in free markets and the power of free enterprise, I think you would agree that the head is easy on that. If you're a scientist here tonight, you really think the head is clear. Are the models perfect? No, they're not. Can they be picked apart? Absolutely. On any point, they can be picked apart. But in the main, scientists would tell you the head's really clear. So it's a hard issue. There's something about the cultural identification of this that causes us either to embrace action or to reject action. And so that's what we've got to build through is that you don't, by saying that we've got a real problem, you're not saying that you've become sort of, you know, the Birkenstock wearing, tofu eating, you know, liberal from the 60s. I like tofu fine, by the way, but steamed rather than fried, please, but I don't insist on it. You know, so, but it becomes this marker, and you don't, the challenge is that we don't want to be separated from our tribe, right? Because it's very important for us as human beings to be part of a tribe, because if you get cut off and you're the loner, you get picked off. Oh, that happens in politics too. I identify with that. Oh, and by the way, the reason that politicians, you know, avoid that being picked off as a loner in their own party is that you know, it's appropriate to talk about at the Dole Institute, I suppose, on bipartisanship. And it happens on both sides. If you're on the right, it's just the same as you're on the left, which is you protect yourself from a primary. Because the most painful thing that can happen to you in politics is the equivalent of a divorce, which is called a primary. Because what happens is that you go to the county convention, and the lady that last year hugged you around the neck, told you she loved you and was praying for you, is now wearing the other guy's sticker. And it is real painful. And so if you're on the right, you protect that right flank. And you go further and further and further to the right. You don't want any daylight over there. And if you're on the left, you do exactly the same thing. You go, in my opinion, nuttier and nuttier lefty. And the result is the country really is at risk of being ungovernable, because you have people that are so far out on their flanks, not that they really believe that stuff, because they really don't. They're far more reasonable than that. But they got to perform when the lights are on. Personal story. One time we were in this secret briefing downstairs in the convention center in the Capitol on Afghanistan. And walks up to the microphone one of our most bombastic members on the Republican side. And lo and behold, if the guy didn't ask a very reasonable question, nudged the guy next to me and said, "Can you believe that he just asked that good of a question?" And what we came to understand is that the lights weren't on. There were no cameras. And so the guy could be his normal, reasonable self. But up on the floor, with C-SPAN going, he's got to be who he is at home. And who he is at home is this bombastic member of Congress who says outrageous things every day on the House floor to perform for the folks at home. And so maybe one of the recommendations here tonight is we eliminate C-SPAN from the Capitol. What do you think? I don't know. Maybe not, but the point is there.
You've written, Bob, about science denial. What are you talking about there? What does that mean?
Well, I think it really sort of becomes a question of faith, right? I mean, some people really reject the science as a matter of faith because they see a contest between faith and science. And I respect that view. I don't share it. My view is that my faith is actually affirmed by science. And so, for example, biblical archaeology puts closer and closer, for example, if I may, to the time of Jesus' actual life, the record of what's said in the Scripture. So I welcome that archaeology. And I celebrate the science of climate change because it's exciting. You know, my view of the way we relate to science is sort of like the way that my wife and I related to our 5 kids when they started to walk. You know, when each of them started to walk, it was a huge celebration. We took pictures, you know. We encouraged them. Come on, Robert, you can do it. That's my view of us and God and science. He's saying, come on, I'll show you how I did it. It's incredible. It's beyond your imagination, but I want to show you. Come on. Come on, you can do it. You can sequence a human genome. You can figure this out. Come on. But for some people, I realize they say, no, you can't sequence a human genome because to do so is to invade the province of God. And like I say, I want to respect that point of view. It's not my point of view, though. My point of view is that let's go there. Let's find out how he did it. It's incredible. It's a celebration of it. And so for that reason, I'm not offended when climate scientists come with information. I think, well, let's learn from it. Let's see what it's about. But for some people, and I understand this view, they think that it's an arrogant position for human beings to say that we can affect the longevity of the earth, particularly since it's directly contrary to Scripture, which indicates that God will determine the longevity of the earth. But, you know, I would point out that there's a tension between God's sovereignty and man's responsibility. They can't be reconciled. You just have to hold them in tension. And so, you know, in some of what's reflected in this room, in the time period of this room, the Cold War, it was surely possible for humans to destroy this planet. In fact, it still is. We still have enough nuclear armaments to do so. So, I think that my friends, and they really are my friends, and some of whom I go to church with, who take this very strong position of God's sovereignty, are overlooking the fact that humans are responsible, and with the wrong buttons being pushed, you really could end this planet. So that means that we live in this tension between God's sovereignty and man's responsibility, and let's get about our business.
Bob, you outlined a few minutes ago kind of your ideas for a policy that would address climate change. What are, in the environment that we see today in Washington and in the country, what are the prospects for actually implementing something like that?
Not so good right now. I think that here's where I think we're going. I think we're looking at 15 and 16 before action can be had. I think I said that to Ryan earlier. 15 and 16 is where I think we might have some action. On the political front, it's because by then Barack Obama will be a lame duck, and the rejection of him as an individual will be on decline, and he is sort of a proxy for government itself. And so for many people, the idea of acting is seen as being in concert with him, and that's, they reject. And so by the time that he's a lame duck, that rejectionism will be in decline. The other, and that'll happen, you know, after 2014, after the 14 midterms. And the other thing that happened, that I think may happen, is that the United States may start to be under some market pressure for a grand bargain. Because by then, if Europe is recovering, perhaps we will be exposed to the risk of repayment on our debt, and the interest rates will be bid up on our bonds, and the result will be that we have to start, basically New York starts calling Washington and saying, do something about that structural deficit. Up until now, what we've had is political discussions and cliffs of various sort that are political creations. But if it turns into a market creation where New York is calling Washington, then I think we might get some real action, as in people saying, okay, listen, what are we going to do? We're going to have to change those entitlement programs. We're going to have to put them on a sustainable footing. That's not the role of the Energy and Enterprise Initiative. That's my friend Paul Ryan and people like that doing that. But the part that is our part is that which do you want to tax going forward? Something you want more of, which is income, or something that you either want less of or maybe want less of, which is emissions. So like my friend Art Laffer says, Ronald Reagan's economics advisor, he says he's agnostic as to climate change. He says, I'm a believer, he's agnostic. He says he doesn't know whether it's real or not. But he says he doesn't need to know whether it's real. He says all he needs to know is you're taxing something you want more of, which is income. You're not taxing something you maybe want less of, which is emissions. he says, change what you tax. It's a no-brainer. And so that's what we hope to be saying in the context of a grand bargain is, yo, lighten up on the taxes on income and put a tax on these emissions, and then watch the free enterprise system do two things at once. One, get expanded economy because of the innovation, and get lower emissions.
Okay. I have one last question I'm going to ask, then we're going to open it up to your Q&A. And as Amanda said, if you have a question in just a couple minutes, just raise your hand and get the attention of one, either Quinn or Joy. They have microphones. Get their attention and you'll get a chance to ask one brief question. But I want to switch back to a subject. I want to go to politics for just a second, Bob. I want to switch back to your point about primaries and your party divorcing you. And the numbers on this are astounding. Just follow me, everybody. Republican Party has lost 5 seats, arguably, in the United States Senate over the last 2 election cycles because they nominated terrible candidates, replaced people like Dick Lugar or Mike Castle in Delaware. I looked up Bob's American Conservative Union rating today. The American Conservative Union is a highly respected conservative organization that rates every member of Congress as to how conservative they vote. Bob's rating, according to the American, his lifetime rating when he ran for re-election was 93, and he lost the primary. You lost to a guy whose rating in his first 2 years was 98, so it's 5% higher. Okay? What does that tell you about what the Republican Party needs to do?
Really high achievers and want A pluses, I think, is what it is. So what is it, 93 an A here at Kansas, or is it an A minus? What is it? I don't know. They're not telling me. So it's, yeah, you know, it's interesting, Bill. I had a 93 ACU, 100% Christian Coalition, 100% National Right to Life, A with the NRA, 0 with the ADA, Americans for Democratic Action, and 23 by some mistake with the AFL-CIO. I really wanted a 0. I demand a recount. I think they slipped in some votes that were not really labor votes, because I would have voted no on all those. So, so pretty conservative fellow, right? But I think that what's happened to my party is it's, we've gotten some, we decided to do what Newt Gingrich told us to do, which was to channel the anger in the midst of the Great Recession. And that'll work for a while, because when people are angry, they will engage in your scapegoat hunt with you. And in fact, they really sort of want you to reflect the anger that they have. Newt was right about that. But if you keep that up, what happens is people sort of are ready to move on. And they start asking you, and I have the sense that this is the kind of people that you have in Kansas, is, you know, sort of practical people that want a solution. And the risk for my party is that if we start looking like all we have to offer is that we just don't like a guy named Barack Obama, is here pretty soon he's not going to be president anymore. And if that was the nature of our platform, that we just don't like him, well, then what are we going to do next? I guess we don't like Hillary after that. But pretty soon people are going to figure out that, well, you just don't like people? I mean, is that your idea? No, you got to come with some solution. Tell me the better idea. And in the case of energy and climate, I'm here to tell you that the left has an answer. It's expand the role of the EPA and regulate new power plants, and then after that, regulate existing power plants. And it is precisely the worst way to accomplish the objective. It's the most inefficient. And we can go with that. We can do what the standard play, I would say, as conservatives. For the conservatives in the room, I want to ask you to show your hands, but I know you're out there. Let's be honest. Our track record is a series of up the middle, up the middle, up the middle punt series of plays, right? Where we say, no, not now, don't do that, slow that down. But then society and the sort of left rolls over us, and we get that program. And then forevermore we're complaining about that program, but we got the program. or they got the program. So EPA is going to do this unless we come up with the alternative, which is this carbon pricing that has the free enterprise system deliver something very exciting. So we can go with old sort of Soviet kind of planned control economy, or we can go with the exciting free enterprise approach. And if our whole deal is just no, don't stop, it's not very inspiring after a while. What Americans are looking for, I think, is a can-do, show me how we can do it. And if you can't show me, then get out of the way, or we'll settle for this centrally planned approach. I accept the challenge of trying to be one of the conservatives who says, no, we're going to try to spare us from that centrally planned approach. We're going to have a much more exciting innovation of energy, and it's going to expand our economy while addressing the environmental problem.
Okay, we're opening it up to your questions and answers. Please get the attention of one of these gentlemen with the cordless mics. We're going to start in the back.
How do you do? I'm Dr. Mark Saylor from Topeka, Kansas. And besides taxing consumption of carbon, what about taxing consumption of everything? Are you a fair tax supporter? I'm a supporter of the fair tax, which removes all tax on income. And I'd like to have your views on that.
Yeah. I never supported the fair tax when I was in Congress. I was almost, I would say I almost persuaded, but I was inclined to the arguments, but I had a hard time figuring out how you could get from all the income tax assumptions that are, for example, in real estate investing, and get it flipped over. That transition is so difficult that I just couldn't see a way forward on that. But I would say to you that what I'm talking about here is sort of a son of fair tax. If you're for fair tax, what I'm talking about is this is a little baby son of fair tax. It's basically taxing consumption, you're exactly right, and not income. And it has some real advantages. I mean, that's the advantage of the fair tax, and what I'm talking about is it's just in one sector we'd be doing that, which is energy.
Okay, we have a question right here.
You said that your carbon tax would not have a catastrophic effect on gas and electricity prices, only 25 cents. If this is true, how would it have enough of effect on the consumption of gas to decrease greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, it's a good question. Some people point out that the price signal is not strong enough on gasoline to get to the energy security objectives that we have. And I'm open to that argument. That's why Charles Krauthammer, for example, proposed a $1 per gallon tax on gasoline a while back. I think Krauthammer was right that if you're really concerned about the national security aspects of this, that you really do want to hit gasoline a little bit harder because you want to send an effective price signal. But we'll start with what we can get, which is, in the case of pricing carbon, is if it's 25 cents a gallon, or $25 per ton, rising over time, because there's going to be a substitution effect that in other words, people are going to innovate, and the result is that the tax revenue is going to decline. So in order to keep a steady supply of revenue to the government, particularly if you're doing what I did in my bill, which was reducing FICA taxes, you got to keep Social Security at least as bad as it already is. You can't make it any worse than it is. And so we had to have a trajectory of an increasing tax to keep Social Security, like I say, at least as bad as it is now. But if you want to really get after the energy security issue, you want to send a stronger price signal. And that'd be okay with me. I'm with Krauthammer.
We have a question right here.
Especially in light of your comment about not acknowledging the problem on the political right, do you have any thoughts on the Economist article recently about model sensitivity and whether or not the models match history at this point?
maybe everybody hasn't seen it. The Economist had an article, I think 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, that said that good news, some of the, some very credible research shows that perhaps the models are a little bit off on the sensitivity, the temperature rising that we're going to experience. I take that as very good news, that if we have a little bit of time, that's great. The important thing that I notice as a policy matter is the Economist leader on the subject, which is earlier in the magazine, says, whatever you do, don't stop talking about a carbon tax. They continue in their full-throated endorsement of a carbon tax because they point out what I've been pointing out here tonight, except they do it much better because they do it in English. I don't read The Economist. I listen to it while I'm working out, and I'm learning English while I'm at it because it's English readers, and so I hear about controversy rather than controversy and things like that. So they continue in their full-throated endorsement of a carbon tax because they say, better than I'm saying here, that that it fixes this market distortion, and it's a kind of market distortion that really, and I'm constantly, obviously you can tell, making the case to conservatives. I hope if you're a progressive here, you're tracking with me, but my main target audience is conservatives because I'm hoping to break through this heart block and into the head where we can say together with whoever wants to say it with us, whether they're progressive or whoever, is that there is a market distortion that is a real problem for people who believe in free enterprise and free markets. Because if I can get away with it, I will socialize my cost at Inglis Industries. And it may stink for Bill because my stuff is going on his property. It may look great for my customers because I got a lower price widget because I can make it stink for Bill and just Bill. That's coal-fired electricity, by the way. It stinks for you if you're asthmatic, but for everybody else, it's cheap electricity. Sorry for them. But there are two things about that. One is there's a competitor to coal-fired electricity called wind that could compete without the production tax credit if all the costs were in on coal. And that's a market distortion. And even the production tax credit is a market distortion. So why not just set the market level and have them compete? The other thing is, Milton Friedman told us in 1975, in the title of his book, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And we're paying the full cost of that coal-fired electricity, just not at the meter, but through an opaque healthcare system for all those sick people that I pay for through my health insurance premium, that we all pay through Medicare and Medicaid. We're paying all right. Either that or we conservatives have to say that one of our patron saints was wrong, that there is such a thing as a free lunch, and we could all be progressives. Sorry if you're progressive here. But the other thing is to keep in mind is not just that sort of inefficiency argument there, but also there's somebody across town that could compete with Inglis Industries. But because I get to dump on Bill and provide cheap widgets to my customers over here, the guy across town can't compete with me. But he can make an equivalent widget without the emissions that stink up Bill's place. And society would be better off if we had a fair competition and he took me out. And so don't let me complain to the Congress that, no, you got to protect me. You know me. I'm your buddy. Stinks for Bill. What you should say to me is, get out of here, Inglis. We want the guy from across town. He's got an honest product. All his costs are in, and he beats you. He takes you out. Society advances. It's called creative destructionism. It's what we in the free enterprise and free market business say we believe in. And so, by the way, all those things, also there are many progressives that believe in that stuff too. But it surely is bedrock conservatism.
Okay, we have a question right here.
Yes, Randy Duncan, Saline County, Kansas. I guess I'm going to turn it to politics. Maybe you want to look at on down to 2016. Yeah. Democrats, probably Hillary and Biden and whomever else. You want to talk about the Republicans and who it might be, who the players might be, who you think, or maybe who you think it should be, maybe in the way of new names, new faces. I'd like to hear your opinion.
Well, I think it's, I've got some friends, you know, Rob Portman is a great friend of mine who I've said I'm for Rob. I also think highly of Jeb Bush, so there's some names for you. I've already told Rob Portman I'm printing signs, Portman for president. If he watches this, he's going to probably call me and tell me, Bob, stop talking about that. I'm running for Ohio. I'm not running for president yet. But he's the kind of guy that would do very well for us as Republicans. But let me say this. It's another political thing, if I could address that, is that we surely seem to have a challenge on our hands with some demographic groups. We're dealing with that in immigration, maybe. But we're also, I would also ask you just in the audience whether you think this is true. You can tell me afterwards. I think we've got a challenge as conservatives with young people because young people are taking chemistry and they're taking physics and they're taking economics, and they know the stuff they hear on the radio is not consistent with those subjects. And they're wondering whether it's the grumpy old party. If it were the Grand Opportunity Party, they might want to be part of it. But if it's the grumpy old party, they're thinking they don't want any part of it. And so we got a real challenge on our hands. We better figure out how to get with it. And what I mean with it is say, listen, we got ideas. We're not just about opposing these other people. We got ideas, and they are better ideas. And they will work. To be excited about something, because everybody wants to be sort of part of Camelot, right? We don't want to just be part of holding on to what we got, because the reality is there's no such thing as standing still. So I guess in a strange sort of way, that makes me a progressive conservative, right? Which I don't think is an oxymoron, because you want to be about advancing, making progress in a way that works on a solid footing.
Okay, next question's right here, Charlie.
It seems to me like every time we reduce government and start reducing regulations, all we end up with is more problems. If business could self-regulate, why haven't they done it by now? It seems to me that if we let business run free without regulation, all we're going to have is just more problems than what we have now.
Right. Yeah, I think business cannot self-regulate. In fact, you do want the government on the scene as a cop on the beat to enforce, for example, keep me at Inglis Industries from dumping on Bill's property. That is just wrong for me to do that. Now, we could let that be a system where Bill has to sue me in trespass, and then we have a court system that upholds the rule of law. Or we can do it in other ways to basically say prospectively, Inglis, listen, you can't do that to Bill's property. Either way, it's about the same thing. Is the government intervening as the cop on the beat to hold me accountable? Because and this, is where I differ maybe from some people who take a more extreme view of a really much smaller government, is that you do want government on the scene, and you do want it, as Mr. Adams thought, strong enough to do really important things, Mr. John Adams. And I know it's heresy for me to speak against Mr. Jefferson since I went to his university, but his notion of this constant revolution strikes me as quite unconservative. I'm so glad that Mr. Adams' views were more reflected in the Constitution. Because according to David McCulley, John Adams had an outline of the Constitution in his head before he got Mr. Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. I think that's impressive. I'll probably before the end of the night come back to John Adams about something else. But
okay, we're going to, Joey, you got two. I want you to do one. We're going to go to Quinn, then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, hi there. It's kind of an open-ended question regarding research, which is, what are your thoughts on the near future direction of research in America? Personally, I was in pharmaceutical industry for 8 years. I was one of very many laid off early 2009. Currently, I'm a staff scientist here at the U. My funding will run out in just over a year. NIH money is down. Pharmaceutical industry, I know, has laid off very many people, and that's simply the industry that I know best. But is research desirable, and you know, where are the jobs, and I guess should they exist in a free market America?
Yeah, this is again where I'm much more Republican than I am Libertarian, right? I think there's a role for government in research, and so. Particularly in before it gets to the commercialization point. Once it gets to the point where a product could be commercialized, you really want the government to back out at that point. So, for example, DARPA, you know, created the internet, and that was for defense purposes, and we spent a lot of money on that, and it was well spent. Because not only did it serve the defense needs, but then it was turned over for commercial interest, and you see what we've gotten. In the case, the specific topic here tonight about energy and climate, I'd like to see us spend a lot of money on carbon capture and sequestration. Because the only hope of the coal industry is that we can make that work. And we may as well make a run at it, because we got so many people involved in coal, so let's try it, and let's spend some money on that. And I realize that there's some libertarians that I know that would say, no, don't do that. That's not an appropriate role of the government. But I would point out that if you've got an obligation, as you do, a fiduciary obligation, running a publicly traded company to return profits to your shareholders, value to your shareholders, you can't invest in things that aren't going to produce a return. And so only government can do that. And I would point out, too, that the biggest project we ever did, the space program, has produced enormous benefits for us here on Earth. From plastics to all kinds of advanced materials to things that we enjoy and take for granted today, they came out of the space program. And by the way, something very inspiring about that space program, do you know that the space shuttles, which are our most recent vehicle, right? Do you know those were designed on slide rules? Now, students here, let me explain what a slide rule is. It was is two pieces of wood, and you slid this thing back and forth. My dad is an industrial engineer, as I said earlier. He's 90 years old, coming this month, or next month. And he tried to show me how to use that slide rule. I could not figure that thing out. That's why I had to major in political science, not engineering. But if we could do that on slide rules, imagine what we can do with supercomputers. I mean, it's just a very exciting time to be alive. So, anyway.
Okay, we got a question here.
Yes. Going back to your first point, which was eliminating all fuel subsidies, just some pragmatic questions, because I guess I'm thinking that like the refineries down in the Gulf who were, had this advanced depreciation that you were talking about for them expanding for the Keystone pipeline so that they would be built, and the whole pipeline was dependent on the refineries there. Eliminating the subsidies for that, nuclear power plants, not a single one will be built without subsidies. So the question is pragmatically how that works in terms of how do you really pragmatically level the playing field so that there is that kind of free enterprise, in a pragmatic way, because we're really talking apples and oranges in many ways.
Yeah. Well, you asked such a hard question because, but the way I would answer it is, as Bill just pointed out, apparently I'm not pure in that I had a 93 and not a 98 or a 100. And so apparently I would counsel others to accept a little bit of impurity along the way. That We needn't have meetings to expel the immoral brother, because by the time we end all those meetings, there ain't going to be anybody left in the room. I can accept some impurities on those subsidies, particularly in nuclear, for example. If basically nuclear can't exist unless you have some way of socializing the cost of storing the waste. I would accept that because otherwise there's no company, there's no lender that would lend to Bill and I if we were starting a nuclear power plant and we said, listen, we have to hold our materials for several 100,000, 800,000, how many million years it is. I'm sure you can see how we can repay over that million-year time period. Can you give us a loan for that? They just won't do it, right? So you almost have to say, we as a society believe this is a reasonable risk to take with nuclear power. We're going to take the waste and we're going to put it here, and we understand that we're all in this together and we're storing it. And Price-Anderson and the limits on liability are sort of that thing where we're saying, listen, we understand the risk and we're going to limit the liability, because otherwise Bill and I can't build a nuclear power plant. We'll never build it. And so, and in production tax credit, you almost have to ramp that down. You can't drop it cold turkey. That's where I would be found out at a 93 rather than 100. Might even get down an 88 on that, you know, get into B territory. Oh. So.
Okay, we're going to take a couple more. We have one right over here, and then we have one final question right here.
Hi, when you talk about the costs of fuel and energy, what are your opinions on some of the direct costs of various fuel forms, be it environmental degradation, habitat loss? Within mining, it could be acid mine drainage and water table toxification, et cetera. Would that fall under the carbon section, or would it fall under the EPA, or where would that go?
Carbon pricing becomes a proxy for some of those things, perhaps. But I firmly believe that if Inglis Industries is in the mining business and I'm doing that to your property, you do in fact have a common law cause of action against me, and you should pursue it, and I should pay. I should be forced to pay you for those costs, because otherwise it's exactly what we're talking about me dumping on Bill's property. And so let's not as a society let me get away with that. If I'm mining, I've got to do it safely. I can't dump on the people downstream and kill all their fish and make their water lousy and kill their mountain. I just can't do it. Or if I do it, I got to pay for it. I got to pay them in damages. And by the way, I've been criticizing some of my libertarian friends, but I'll congratulate one, Jonathan Adler's on this point in a big way about the law of trespass being a solution to some of this, and I think his writings are very good on, he's right on point on that.
Okay, we have one last question right here.
In the United States, we're consumers. I mean, let's face it, we like our stuff. Sorry, do you need me to stand up? Yeah. We like our stuff here. We have SUVs, McMansions, and all of that. And it seems to me that a lot of the hostility towards accepting the science of climate change has to do with people think that we have to give our stuff up. So how do you deal with the myth that, or how do you deconstruct the myth that dealing with climate change means that we're going to adversely affect our standard of living?
Yeah, it's a big part of it, right? In two ways that I answer that. One is that I think that is really one of the reasons for it bouncing off the heart and not entering the head, because it's seen as an attack on a way of life. And in this room with Bob Dole's Measuring Life, where we see it, right? The building with the guys that came home from the big war, the building of a suburban lifestyle that has created an economy that is the envy of the world. And so there's sort of a sense that now some pointy-head bureaucrats and their godless scientists are coming along and telling us that we were somehow wrong to build our house in the suburbs and to have a minivan for our kids to go to soccer. And that these now elitists are going to tell us to give up that house and buy a Prius or have no car, walk to work and live in a public housing hovel downtown close to your work or something, right? I mean, that's sort of the sense of it, is that they're going to tell me how to live. And then it gets even worse because it sort of feels like they're saying that Bob Dole or my dad were wrong to do that, to build that economy that way. And I'll be doggone if they're going to tell me that they were wrong. You know, I mean, so it really is sort of that's where the fighting words come from. So I think you're onto something. There really is that sort of sense that that's maybe one of the reasons for the rejection. The way that I hope to break through that is to say, well, now that we know the full cost of that energy we've been using, can we believe in innovation? Can we believe that we could do it again? That we could reinvent some of those things? Speaking to The Economist, you know, the cover this week is on the driverless car. And that may sound crazy, but Google plans on doing it. Bill Gates told a small group of us in Congress a while back, about 10 years ago, I guess, he says, in the future there will be no accidents because my car will know where your car is and it will stop for you. That's coming very rapidly. And so, yeah, we built a suburban lifestyle. And yes, it had costs that now we're seeing. If we put those costs in, can we trust in the ingenuity of human beings to do it again? In other words, to revolve again on this innovation and make it so that we can improve upon it. I think that's what the challenge we've got to accept, and we've got to be excited about it. The other way I'd answer is this, that there's a conservative objection to action on energy and climate that runs like this, and I think it's a true bill. It's true. It's a moral objection, which is that we can't leave Africa dark. We can't say that, okay, we develop, nobody else can develop because now we've messed up the planet, so nobody else can develop. Because that keeps Africa dark, and that's immoral. And this is typically an argument from conservatives, and I think it's a good argument. So what we say at the Energy Enterprise Initiative is we need to be about more power, not less. More mobility, not less. I don't accept the conclusion that we have to, in order to address climate, energy and climate, that we have to sit and shiver or sweat in the dark. That's not the way this story has to end. The way it can end is with real innovation that enables Africa to leapfrog our technology into a distributed power system where they don't have to have these power plants and they don't have to have all these power lines. Just like they don't have to have AT&T putting copper wire in the ground through Congo. They just get these cell towers and they put them up, and then they got cell phones, and who needs your copper wires? And so if we set the economics right in this country, we have the best and the brightest here developing this new stuff with breakthroughs in solar and battery technology and wind and perhaps carbon capture and sequestration, although that would never be distributed energy. But if you get those distributed energy systems to have breakthroughs, wow, what an opportunity for the developing world. It answers that moral objection that conservatives rightly put forward.
Bob, thanks so much for coming to KU and the Dole Institute.
Great to be with you.
We appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. Hope to see you a week from Thursday night when we talk about the Eisenhower Memorial on the Mall. And thanks to Young Americans for Liberty for co-sponsoring tonight. Have a great evening.